didn't make an appearance. Bannon claimed executive privilege despite Trump not naming him in a meritless claim for executive privilege put forward by the former president. Executive privilege is something that falls within the purview of. Hello, Molly. Hello, Molly. Lovely to see you. Executive privilege is something that falls within the purview of the current president, which is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden has declined to exercise executive privilege for Trump. And certainly Steve Bannon left Trump's employment left the White House in 2017 and currently hosts a violence inciting podcast called War Room, in which he, promoted the insurrection, told everybody it was going to be a crazy day on January the 6th, and is generally an architect of chaos, violence, disorder, and Christo-fascism. So what's the judge said? The judge has postponed arraigning by Steve Bannon. So he's got some conditions under which he can remain out of jail at the moment. So the government already has his passport, and he's agreed to the conditions of notifying the government before any domestic travel. So it would have been nice to have a gag order. I remember when Roger Stone was awaiting trial, and instead of being reasonably quiet, he was tweeting out or posting on Instagram pictures of the judge's face in the crosshairs of a gun target. And we were waiting to see him go to jail for violating the conditions of bail in terms of refraining from commenting on the case or refraining from furthering untruths about the judge or inciting violence against officials of the law. But as we know, Roger Stone was pardoned by Donald Trump. Who else was pardoned? Steve Bannon was pardoned by Donald Trump for participating in a grift that involved fleecing Donald Trump supporters as part of a charitable effort to gather donations to privately build a wall. And as we know now, many of those donations were spent on boats and went into the personal fund account of Steve Bannon and his co-conspirators in that particular crime. But yes, pardoned by Donald Trump. And I'm back talking about these things because it's a lot. There's a lot to process. It can get discouraging sometimes, waiting for things to suddenly flip around and improve under Biden. But there are massive strides being made. The infrastructure bill is being signed right now. Has it been signed as I speak? Let's have a look. No. I'm noticing that Milo Yiannopoulos is claiming to have COVID and have injected himself with ivermectin, which isn't just a veterinary treatment. It's used as an oral treatment for livestock, as an antiparasitic treatment, but it's also used externally on humans to get rid of lice. It's just that people who can't get a prescription for it because they don't have lice, and it's not recommended for prevention or treatment of COVID, they are buying cheap versions of ivermectin that are designated for agricultural purposes, that are designated for treating livestock, consequently often referred to as a livestock-only drug. But yes, so Milo Yiannopoulos is claiming on social media to be injecting himself with ivermectin as a COVID treatment. Now, sometimes people on the left like to say, look, it's very hypocritical of conservative thought leaders and right-wing thought leaders and pundits to decry the safety of the vaccine because they're probably all vaccinated. and certainly Fox News, which is the home of a lot of potent COVID disinformation, that's a place where you, as part of the conditions of your continuing employment for Fox, you have to either be vaccinated, show proof of vaccination, or show proof of daily testing. Molly notes that people have been getting kidney and liver damage from it. Yes, because the dosage suggestions for agriculturally designated supplies of ivermectin don't have human dosages printed on the box because they're not organized for human consumption. The boxes don't have instructions for an appropriate dosage for human, and certainly don't have COVID-related dosage suggestions because it's not recommended for human treatment for COVID. So Molly and Mark are here in the comment section, which is lovely to see. I missed you, Molly, and it's lovely to see you too, Mark. But yeah, so people have been getting liver, kidney damage. Dr. Fauci, the CDC have asked Americans to stop self-treating with ivermectin because it's contraindicated. It's not recommended as a treatment for COVID. And it's certainly not recommended to take animal products to treat COVID. Oh, look, some hearts floating across the screen. That's quite cute. Evidently a new HAPS feature. So thank you, Mark. That was fun. Let's see. I wonder if I can still share the screen. Oh, it says present on stream. That looks like it's... Oh, it's the screen sharing is coming soon. Okay, so no, can't share the screen at the moment. Share stream? What's that button do? No, well, it's just me for today, but otherwise I'd be playing you video of Milo Yiannopoulos, who is now self-proclaimed ex-gay. He did marry a man a few years ago, but he's saying he felt that there was a sign from God to him to declare himself to be ex-gay. He's Christian, so he's now selling Catholic iconography on the Church Militants YouTube shopping network. Well, it's nice that he's got a job, I guess. Let me see.
They call them accent finishes.
All right, I don't really need to get into that, but a YouTube channel literally called Church Militant. Now, I used the word Christo-fascist earlier in this broadcast, and I'm getting comfortable with using that term just because of the success of various Christian extremists and Christian billionaires in terms of buying up influence networks and media networks. So the evidence that I can see online suggests that the Koch brothers, the surviving Koch brother, but previously to his death, David and Charles Koch both funded academic pursuits, gave scholarships, subsidized institutes, and have this vast, pernicious network of influence that helps push American legislature and push American opinions in a direction of their preference. And that's often very Ayn Randian, almost feudal style preferences of hierarchical thinking, whereby people who are rich have no responsibility to give back to the state in forms of high corporate taxes. They believe in minimizing taxes paid by wealthy people and promoting the undermining of government services and creating a space for vigilantism and racial injustice, basically advocating for the kind of democracy whereby disdained or relatively disregarded demographic groups in American society continue to endure the consequences of systematic injustice. So say continue to live near highways that bypass their communities and cut them off from transport opportunities and the kind of job opportunities and education opportunities that are more available when you can easily avail yourself of transport in the same way that more celebrated communities can access highways because they haven't had highways built over their communities rather than any exits servicing their communities. They're also, the Kochs are involved in a lot of manufacturing in the United States, and to have politicians who favor uh, a toothless environmental regulation agency and being able to pollute at will at any extent without consequence, that's one way in which injustice is delivered to a significant subset of the American people on the basis of being often out of political favor, and often suffering from the type of hopelessness you get when uh, your community has more difficulty accessing the vote, fewer opportunities to vote during hours that correspond with your hours or your freedom from employment hours, and just the other, and gerrymandering as well, which is another way to decrease the accountability of politicians to communities which they should serve and which they should be invested in positive outcomes. But instead, if you favor corporate outcomes, then you don't mind that you can cheaply manufacture waterproof clothing, but not treat the runoff, which might be a highly toxic runoff associated with higher rates of cancer and neurological disorders and chromosomal disorders and birth defects, and have those consequences be concentrated for communities that are predominantly of color. And yep. Oh, Mark, I think, said hello to Molly. That's nice. Hi, Mark. Hi, Molly. Uh, because because I haven't been broadcasting on a regular basis, I think the audience is quite small today, but I'm grateful still to people who tuned in. And I did say I was going to talk about Rittenhouse, so uh, maybe I'll log off this particular broadcast and come back. Did I run out of battery? No. All right. Shall I log off and come back again, or shall we just persevere? And then if I keep broadcasting at a regular time, maybe we'll see more people. I don't want to be dissuaded by the fact that the show isn't particularly popular at the moment. I've certainly neglected it. I took some space and time for myself because settling into the United States is quite a big undertaking. And I've been trying to live my principles of white people need to be more direct with other white people in terms of calling them out or confronting the extent to which they've diverged from reality, the extent to which they might still insist that Donald Trump won the election, or it's not racist to um, to oppose vaccines. I have made the argument to my neighbours that it is racist to oppose vaccines and to oppose mask wearing and to oppose any and all forms of COVID mitigation strategies, because COVID is a disease that has uh, had more damaging consequences for vulnerable communities. And some of those vulnerable communities now, in a post vaccine Delta wave of the coronavirus, some of those are self induced negative consequences. The unvaccinated getting hospitalized, or composing a high proportion of the people hospitalized with COVID, yes, that's a self-induced negative consequence, but we're still all in the same boat. If one person's made a hole in the side of the boat with vaccine defiance, they're not the only people getting wet. This pandemic is being prolonged, and people of relatively impoverished background who have less access to medical care, those people are disproportionately suffering harm from some more privileged white people who have chosen to pursue internet hoaxes and chosen to pursue uh, the ego gratification of conspiracy theories about COVID and about the vaccine over doing what's right and responsible and community minded, namely to say, getting vaccinated, protecting themselves and their communities, instead of choosing to prolong the pandemic in order to harm Joe Biden and prove that Donald Trump was right and COVID isn't really that serious and you don't really need to take any precautions. Uh, Molly said the new app unfollowed a lot of the people I follow. You had to refollow me. Well, I'm glad of your determination to find and follow me, Molly. Uh, Hang on, I'm just going to check if this is spam or not. Hello? Spam. Yep, spamity spam. Uh, so yes, I don't know. I can't even see my profile. I don't know what button to press. Molly says Haps is working on the glitches. That's good. And um, I will say it's so beautiful here. I mean, I'm living in New England. I'm living in Massachusetts. The fall has been beautiful. Uh, Enjoying Halloween here has been gorgeous. Somebody I respect, a pundit, a writer called Noah Smith, who writes about the economy but also about sociological things, has suggested that patriotism is a popular strategy and that we shouldn't relegate or we shouldn't allow that to be simply the purview of Trump and Trumpers. So we could try doing that. We could try saying we out patriot you, Trump people, because we more genuinely support American ideals. And we can do that without adopting the conservative mantra of opposing CRT, opposing critical race theory, and participating in a confected outrage strategy of saying, oh no, what are our children being taught in schools? um, Taking advantage of the lack of chaos in the Biden administration, the fact that things are improving uh, with regards to employment numbers, things are improving with regards to um, levels of Americans who are vaccinated. So there's less pandemic chaos, there's less businesses closing. People have the time and space to now have white people worries and say, are my children being made to feel bad by the teaching of history in schools? It's an honest and a more real way to exist when you accept that history isn't always pleasant and history isn't always something that supports an idealized version of patriotism. I mean, love for someone isn't love if they're just presenting a fabricated form of themselves for you to love. If I say, love me, I'm perfect, and I hide everything about me, that's okay for maybe a date or two. But if you're going to have a serious relationship with someone, you don't want to have a curriculum that is entirely full of glossy images only. You want to have some truth. So the truth about American history isn't always glossy and is full of the purposeful exclusion of African Americans, of Black people from opportunity, from economic opportunity. And when we say systematic racism, that means racism that's so entrenched in systems that an individual who participates doesn't even need to have racist convictions anymore. They just have to be compliant with the status quo. to someone who's not racist, but who says, oh, no, we don't give home loans to people who live in the district that's marked with a red line on this map. You know, they're not racist against red lines. They may have no personal drive to exclude a black person from a home loan, but racism has become so entrenched in policies and practices that they just have to maintain the status quo in order for a racist outcome, a racist, harmful, exclusionary outcome to be perpetuated, not just against the person who's denied the loan, but the generations of people who then are excluded from the opportunity of building intergenerational wealth. Because if you couldn't get a mortgage and banks refused to give you a mortgage because you lived in an area with a concentrated black population and there was a red line drawn around your district and coloured in, then as property increases in value, as white families benefit from the home loans they were able to obtain, the injustice is compounded. So Molly notes that race theory isn't taught in K to 12 schools. I wish it was. There are various anti-racist inclusions in various schools teaching. So it's not critical race theory. It's not, in pure terms, looking at the law to see how even laws can encode racist outcomes, and even laws can encode racist prejudice. Uh, it's still objectionable to some people because they don't want their children being taught any anti-racist principles, because that might make their children better than they are in a moral way. It might teach their children to contrast their parents' alleged morality and their practices. So there are people who fear wokeness, not and the teaching of real history, because they on some level are fearful of their children being different to them and their children being better informed than they are. So Molly notes that there's cultural studies courses now. That's interesting. Oh, that's my sleeves making a sort of noise. Well, I think I should probably go and get ready to do things, but it's been lovely to connect back in with Molly and Mark, and yeah, to recommit to my goal of being at least one additional voice in the wilderness, in the wilderness of the internet, saying this is the work we have to do to protect democracy and to protect humanity. Racism degrades outcomes for all of us. Racism has been part of the reason for not accepting that climate change was happening. Racism is part of the reason why people disregarded the peril of island nations, the peril of people living in equatorial climates where places, temperatures increasing and getting warmer results in significantly negative health outcomes and an increased rate of adverse cardiac events, such as heart attacks. Molly says, I was missed. Oh, bless your heart, Molly. I missed you all too. And I'd just broken the habit. And there was part of me also going, who am I again? Before I was an Australian commenting on America from the outside. And now I'm here. It's a lot to process to say I'm in America and I have the audacity as an American resident to still comment critically on the American political system and the voting, the occasional voting trends of the American people. And who am I to do that? So there's enough chutzpah left in me that I can still front up to a camera with all of the chutzpah that I have in me and say, yep, there's still room for my voice in a commentary sense. I'm still here to say Vice President Kamala Harris is worthy of support, had diplomatic triumphs in France, rebuilding those relationships that Trump eroded. And she can speak French. She went to high school in Montreal and attended a French immersion high school for some years. So she can speak French. She's an accomplished woman, and the media seems to be engaged in running hit pieces on her to claim that her low poll numbers are a consequence of some failing, some personal failing on her part, when there were never any standards or expectations created in the media in association with former Vice President Michael Pence. And it seems evident to me, and I think a growing number of people, that the media needs scandal, and the media may have employed additional people during the Trump administration because people were more worried then. There was a lot of perpetual scandals and crises that people adopted certain positions about. Either you were like, oh, I need to stay abreast of these scandals because I need to know what malevolent or negligent stuff Trump is up to now, or you watch the news out of a sense of defensiveness to say, I bet Trump's doing just fine. Let me watch Fox News for a defense of Donald Trump that I can feel comfortable with because he represents me. He represents the comfortable white dominant status quo that is my emotional security blanket. Yay, Molly says my voice is important. I cherish it. I'm so glad. That means so much to me. You don't know, Molly. we're in the same country now, and we're living under the same benevolent federal government and a lot of fairly negligent or malevolent state governments or Republican controlled state legislatures that, to my mind, are imperiling American democracy through virtue of gerrymandering districts and trying to carve out additional seats to make seats safer for Republican political candidates by choosing the voters, choosing which districts will be more consequential. Uh, and that this puts Americans in peril because having unaccountable politicians means politicians don't have to answer for their misdeeds or for neglect. They can fail to serve the interests of the people, knowing that they'll still be rewarded with a certain amount of tribalistically rusted on voters who can never be deterred from voting for them. But in any case, I think the approval numbers of Joe Biden also are driving me to recommit myself to the task of broadcasting because we have to match the energy. Christians often have a lot of proselytizing energy to come out and say, have you heard the good news? Well, there's a lot of people trying to manufacture scandal around the Biden administration in order to keep up ratings from the heights that they hit when Trump was in office. So people don't accept a loss very easily, and people in the media are probably trying to resist losing their jobs. They have to pretend it's a scandal that Kamala Harris spoke French and had a French accent when she was visiting the country. And someone called Amy is here and says hello. Hello, Amy. Yes, there's lots of ways in which democracy is being imperiled. I notice on Twitter there's often a lot of agitation around consequences to do with the insurrection, January the 6th. And I'm okay with that moving as slowly as the law requires. And I just had my fingers crossed that Merrick Garland wasn't in some way opposed to taking action against the leaders of that violent attempt and pre-thought out, pre-planned effort to overthrow the elected government of the United States and overturn the consequences of the election via various legal strategies, pretending that it was legal to have then Vice President Mike Pence just throw out the votes from 7 states that Trump wanted the results of to be contested, even though 62 court cases had been lost by Trump lawyers. They sought to delay the certification of Joe Biden's electoral college win through use of the, the goodwill that Trump had cultivated with his supporters, and not only goodwill but violent rage against Joe Biden. They there were marks in a grift, and the fabricated story they were told was a theft had occurred, and it was their patriotic duty to go to the Capitol and try to kill police officers, try to kill the Capitol Police, and try to kill Metropolitan Police in an effort to gain access to the Capitol and then kill or imprison or take hostage various legislators to delay that day's vote for certifying the election win of Joe Biden, and to create a delay that would create uncertainty, loss of precedent, and introduce enough uncertainty that then uh, Mike Pence would have sturdier ground for saying, well, it's all a bit just controversial here, can't proceed with things as normal, we'll have to delay it. Yes, let's delay the 7 states as well. Let's throw it back to the electors, throw it back to those 7 states to create a pathway of the election results being in such a dispute that then the outcome of the election had to be determined by how many different states were represented in the House of Representatives. And the Republican, the number of states controlled by Republicans outnumbers the number of states controlled by Democrats, even though there's more, even though Democrats have the majority of votes in the House, they have a majority of representatives, they don't have a majority of states. So Republicans would have been able, pure by virtue of going 1 vote for each state, say Trump is the president. We think that's the best solution. So I don't know if everybody gets that delay, that intended delay, wasn't going to need the military to be part of that coup. They had this legal avenue they were going to pursue of just refuse to go ahead with the normal certification of Joe Biden's election victory. Say that's so contentious now. There's the Capitol riot. We can't proceed as normal. We're going to do this alternate strategy that's going to happen to favor Trump because we know in advance Republicans have a higher number of states under their control than Democrats. So this little known method for settling the results of a contested election that would have been in Trump's favor, and that was the outcome they were trying to orchestrate through instigation of the Capitol riots. So I guess the committee is trying to find evidence specifically of that plot, and we already have the evidence of John Eastman's memo. There's evidence of other memos now that Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis also wrote to Mike Pence to say, this is what you need to do, this is how it needs to go down. You need to take advantage of being the vice president in the same way. Who was it? Somebody else, not Eastman. Some other Trump aide also wrote a memo saying we have to. Jefferson took advantage of his position when he was vice president. That's what we have to do now. All ways. Oh, look, I've got a question from somebody on Twitch, Amy, saying, what are your thoughts on the Rittenhouse case? Should he walk free or go to jail? Look, I'm not in the jury and I haven't seen all the videos. I would say there was reckless endangerment of human life because that young man shouldn't have been in legal possession of a weapon. Now, the judge threw out that charge today. He said that there's some provision in Wisconsin law that says somebody under 18 can't have possession of a certain weapon if the barrel is over or under a certain length. So that's beyond my understanding. I'm disappointed and sad that he's thrown out that charge of, it's only a misdemeanor, but of illegally being in possession of a weapon of a certain description, apparently. I just thought it was illegally being in possession of a dangerous weapon, but no, the law has fine print and the judge has tossed out that potential charge for Kyle Rittenhouse. So that was my hope, that he at least would face legal consequences for being in possession of that weapon. I think bringing such a weapon to across state lines from Illinois to Wisconsin and putting himself in that position. The jury isn't allowed to see evidence that relates to video of Kyle Rittenhouse 2 weeks prior to the protests in Wisconsin, in Kenosha, saying that he would like to shoot. He would like to shoot people shoplifting. He would like to shoot rioters who looted. He would like to shoot them. Because that speaks to propensity. And apparently, in the legal system in the United States, you can't admit evidence with regards to propensity, because unless it proves you've committed this, or it's evidence suggesting you've committed this specific crime. So a video of Kyle Rittenhouse admitting to wanting to kill looters and to shoot them 2 weeks before he did shoot some people is not evidence, apparently, that's admissible, because it's not evidence of him saying, I want to go to Kenosha and shoot people there. So it's not connected to that specific night. Now that's hard. I would prefer for there to be more legal recourse to include evidence to speak to propensity. If I was in a domestic violence relationship and my husband was accused of killing me, and he'd made a video 2 weeks earlier saying, I would really like to shoot women in the head if they annoy me, then I would want that evidence to be admissible, because propensity seems highly relevant to me. Propensity speaks to intent. Yes, Molly notes that no one goes to a protest with an AR-15. Well, clearly, if you're Kyle Rittenhouse, you do, because he viewed himself as as a lot of conservative people do, someone who needs a gun in order to uphold the fabric of American society. So those of us who don't view him favorably think it's irrational to bring a gun to a protest, even if you anticipate property destruction. If you bring a gun, and people think you're an active shooter and try and apprehend you and take your weapon away from you, and you kill them, that's something you've created because you brought a gun to that situation, particularly if you're too young to legally have such a weapon in your possession. Now, is it the case that the weapon was legally in his possession? I had heard that it was obtained illegally because Kyle Rittenhouse asked his sister's boyfriend to purchase such a weapon for him. But it doesn't seem as if any charges relating to that weapon acquisition or possession are left now. And certainly Kyle Rittenhouse made a white supremacist sign with his hands, the OK sign, which has been appropriated by white supremacists. And he was wearing a t-shirt that said free as F word. And he was arm in arm with various Proud Boys, and that is a white supremacy group. So that evidence has been withheld from the jury as well. That was the day he was released on bail, and he had raised $2 million bail through crowdfundme that was supported by, I guess, a variety of small dollar amounts from right-wing conservatives as well as right-wing wealthy people. There was some American TV star who was a TV star as a child who now has enough wealth that he could contribute to Kyle Rittenhouse's $2 million bail. So Rittenhouse wore that shirt celebrating his freedom and posed making the OK sign. So we who are not on the jury have access to that evidence, to know that he does affiliate himself with white supremacists, that he uses that white supremacist hand gesture, and that he has a propensity towards violence. We've seen videos of him beating up a girl with multiple punches when he was in high school. The jury won't have seen that. I guess that would also be excluded for by virtue of speaking to propensity to be violent. You have to only evaluate something in out of context of previous behavior or previous activities. It seems so odd to me. Molly says the judge is very biased, and we have heard that the judge did not allow the two men killed by Rittenhouse to be called victims in court. I've seen some lawyers say they've seen that happen before. Judges disallow use of victim to refer to the people killed in relation to an event on trial because they think it could be too prejudicial to the jury. Now, the judge didn't actively say the defense should refer to the two deceased men as rioters and looters, but he didn't disallow it. So there was a lot of people pointing out this created an injustice paradigm of the men killed not being able to be referred to as victims, but instead the door being left open to refer to them in a way that centered criticisms of them and centered justifications that conservatives might get behind, saying, well, it doesn't matter if you kill them because we dehumanize people for committing crimes if we don't like them, if they're not part of our tribe. So Kyle's part of our tribe, so any crimes he might have committed won't be relevant. He is our white knight champion of justice against what we see as a movement to burn America and burn Americans' sense of patriotism and burn the patriotism of children in schools and just trash everything we love about America, which is our ability to view ourselves through rose-colored glasses and rose-colored history textbooks that claim that slavery was not that bad, that omit reference to the various white-led race riots in which the property and lives of various Black Americans were taken by jealous, paranoid white people. So that multiple riots, but I only know of the Black Wall Street riot, and I've even forgotten where that was now. Let's find out. Hang on, I'll check. Tulsa, the Tulsa Race Massacre. Oh, I found a website called the Zinn Education Project, and I know that Howard Zinn, I think, is a historian who made a significant impact on the education of some people. So I haven't seen this website before. Villages being massacred by Puritans in Connecticut. A fort on the Apalachicola River in Florida was firebombed by the US Army in 1816. In 1855, Bloody Monday, on Election Day, Protestant mobs attacked German and Irish Catholic neighborhoods. So those were white people. It wasn't necessarily black then, but this was still a tribalistic attack of Protestants against Catholics and German immigrants. So they didn't want them to have power. They were afraid of sharing the United States. And that was that riot. What else have we got? Confederate troops massacred over 500 surrendering Union soldiers, majority African American, at the Civil War Battle of Fort Pillow in 1864. There you go. Massacred African American troops. 1864 Sand Creek Massacre. A Colorado cavalry unit acting on orders from Colorado's governor and ignoring a white surrender flag flying just below a US flag brutally attacked Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes, people who had escaped from slavery and were following the Union Army in 1864, Ebenezer Creek Massacre. They were blocked from crossing Ebenezer Creek, leading to their death. 1866 Memphis Massacre. White civilians and police killed 46 African Americans and injured many more while burning houses, schools, and churches in Memphis, Tennessee. 1866 New Orleans Massacre. New Orleans. The New Orleans Massacre occurred when white residents attacked black marchers near the reconvened Louisiana Constitutional Convention. 1868 Camilla Massacre. As African Americans marched peacefully in response to their expulsion from elected office, more than a dozen were massacred near Albany, Georgia. So these are a lot of massacres from white people, whether they be white Protestants or white Confederate soldiers. 1868, in response to the promotion of voter registration, a KKK-like group massacred hundreds of people, most of whom were African American, in Opelousas. I don't know where that's also in New Orleans. Okay. So a backlash against growing political power, i.e. people being registered to vote. There's this backlash, this urge to deny people political power by killing some people and intimidating others. 1868 St. Bernard Parish Massacre. The white St. Bernard Parish in Louisiana massacre of African Americans was carried out by white men to terrorize the recently emancipated voters. 1871 Los Angeles Chinatown Massacre. A lynch mob of 500 Anglo and Latino Los Angelinos rioted and murdered at least 18 Chinese residents after a white civilian died in a shootout. Oh, there you go. That's a lot. I haven't made it through a lot, but there's a lot more of these. Coal miners in Rock Springs, Wyoming attacked the Chinese workers in the Rock Springs Massacre of 1885. Striking black Louisiana sugarcane workers were massacred in the Thibodaux Massacre 1887. That's a lot. You can see why people might say, I'm afraid of my child learning history. And Republicans frame it as critical race theory, but they're afraid of the teaching of accurate history. History phobia. So yes, Molly notes that America has a deep history of violent racism. Yes. As does the world. But American exceptionalism sometimes motivates a lot of untruth. Lots of people shy away from awkward truth. But the German schooling system didn't shy away from it. They recognized that a preventative measure against further descent into fascism and tribalistically endorsed state mass murder would be accurate teaching of history. Unafraid, brave history. So yes, it might take some courage to learn truth, and maybe we have to model bravery to the Republicans and speak about what it is that we're doing. Brave history. History which might make you uncomfortable. History which maybe would just be more cozy to turn away from it and rip it out of the history books and just go along with Republicans who are prepared to do the dirty work of shoveling the unpleasantness of American history under the carpet. So we have to be, I guess, outspoken, not only in denouncing that, but also in modeling what we want for our children and for the people of America and the children of America. We want them to be brave, to learn about history and say, yeah, that's not great. wasn't there and I didn't do it, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't learn about it. Doesn't mean I'm not free entirely from association with it, but I can definitely be part of a resolve to do better. Yes, Molly says they can learn how to change it. Exactly. There's lots of people with resolve to do better and resolve to recognize injustice and not to try and pervert history to pretend that injustice was actually just. Because when you have that as a core understanding of history, then your brain is like a honeypot for falsities. You'll keep latching on to details of one person committing a crime if they're black and disregarding details of someone else committing a crime if they're white. You'll dwell on what you think are the iniquities of democratic politicians and ignore um, the corruption and the theft and the um, stock market misbehavior. What's the word? Misconduct. You'll ignore misconduct of Republicans if you're a subscriber to a fake narrative that America is always perfect and that America is better when church and state are together, and that the state is Christian, and that you have one nation under God and one religion, as Michael Flynn, disgraced former general and disgraced former national security advisor, Trump appointee, declared on the weekend that America should have be one nation under God. We must be one nation under God and must therefore have one religion. So, yes, that's all the things we're fighting against at the moment. It's very dark in here, and I didn't turn a light on before I started broadcasting, so I'm like a spooky little disembodied white face talking. But thanks for being with me while I broadcasted today. There's no place on the screen I can see that even tells me how long I've broadcasted for, but I know it's enough. Thanks so much for chatting with me, Molly. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we find some of our regular audience again if I keep it up and I broadcast around this time or earlier. See you later, Molly. Take care, and thanks for trying to be on the right side of history here and trying to be someone who has high expectations for America. That's something I try to do as a parent, is to have high expectations of my children without having too high expectations. High expectations enough to inspire effort. America needs to make an effort to minimize injustice and promote justice, as well as embracing prosperity and seek, which, by the way, Democrats are better at delivering. And the infrastructure bill will have been signed now, and that's an important thing. And Trump tried to say he would do infrastructure, so at least he underlined the significance of infrastructure and achieving uh, federal contributions to America's infrastructure needs. Of course, federal funding is one thing. I'm imagining that Republican controlled states will not necessarily responsibly spend that federal money, because, as far as I can see, there seems to be a lot of willful withholding of federally delivered resources, people refusing Medicaid expansions, Medicare expansions, people misappropriating COVID relief funds to, I don't know, support more private prisons, or just doing weird, inappropriate things. So fingers crossed that lots of this infrastructure bill gets spent where Americans most need it, and that we accept you can't always persuade fearful white Americans that Democrats are good for them, even when Democrats deliver infrastructure that helps. They'll still be deriving egotistical pleasure from denigrating Democrats and wearing their little Go Brandon t-shirts that signify an expletive, that signify F Joe Biden. They'll still have that as a unifying part of their identity that unifies them with people around them. And I still don't know what the answer is, but I know that my neighbors probably don't want to text me anymore after the number of text messages I've sent them back with very wholehearted uh, categorizations of current events that they don't agree with and don't support, and that probably cause them a bit of painful cognitive dissonance. Who knows? They maybe are very good at just dismissing what I send them in return when they send me things about how COVID is overhyped. And I send them back not only resources explaining that COVID is a serious problem and a pandemic that's being perpetuated by willful vaccine refusal and willful mask neglect, but also I send them information that I think supports the contention that it's racist, it's uncaring, it's neglectful, and irresponsible to participate in the whole industry of COVID disinformation and COVID mitigation measure sabotage. So we'll see how I go with that in our neighbourhood. But thanks, Molly, again, and take care, anybody who's a repeat viewer or anybody who chooses to watch this later on. Take care.